Greetings, Facebook family. I am your host, Quincy James Reinhart. On behalf of our founding dean, the Reverend Dr. Lawrence Edward Carter Sr., President Gabriel Denard Cloud, and the chapel assistants, we welcome you to our virtual chapel family. We welcome you, our virtual chapel family, to our last Thurman Thursday for the academic school year. I know. I hope you were enlightened, encouraged by one of our many presentations. It is our desire to create a space where one can grapple with theological, political, and philosophical ideas that will inform and challenge us to become better and responsible cosmic citizens. And so, this evening's conversation is about vocational discernment, listening inwardly to the call that is on our life so that we can go into the world and create a better, beloved global community. Let us assume a posture of meditation as I read a passage from Let Your Life Speak, Listening to the Voice of Vocation by Parker Palmer. He says, vocation, the way I was seeking it, becomes an act of will, a grim determination that one's life will go this way or that, whether it wants to or not. It is the self is sin written. If the self is sin written and will bow to truth and goodness only under duress, the approach to vocation makes sense. But if the self seeks not pathology, but wholeness, as I believe it does, then the willful pursuit of vocation is an act of violence toward ourselves, violence in the name of a vision that, however lofty, is forced on the self from without rather than grown from within. True self, when violated, will always resist us, sometimes at great cost, holding our lives in check until we honor its truth. Vocation does not come from willfulness, it comes from listening. I must listen to my life and try to understand what it is truly about, quite apart from what I would like it to be about. Or my life will never represent anything real in the world, no matter how earnest my intentions. That insight is hidden in the word vocation itself, which is rooted in the Latin for voice. Vocation does not mean a goal that I pursue. It means a calling that I hear. Before I can tell my life what I want to do, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. I must listen for the truths and values at the heart of my own identity, not the standards by which I must live, but the standards by which I cannot help but live if I am living my own life. These are the words from Parker Palmer. It gives me great honor to introduce a beloved and authentic friend, sister colleague, whom I've known for over 14 years. She has challenged me to be my authentic self when my former self did not want to live into the person I am today, an out cis queer male. Some may say, why is this designation important? It is important because naming yourself gives you power over your own story. So thank you, my dear sister, for saying, I love you, bro, but that ain't you. The Reverend Kendra Frazier is an ordained clergywoman, licensed clinician, and the founder of CEO of Kind, Knowing Yourself in Need of Devotion Consulting, Inc. Kind offers traumatic informed care through a variety of services, from clinical therapy for individuals, families, and couples to trauma-informed training for corporate entities and ecclesial communities and spiritual direction. These services are centered in evidence-based interventions such as mindfulness, motivational interviewing, CBT, and IPT. Kind also offers executive listening sessions for organizations. Kendra was most recently the founding executive director of the Hope Center, a free mental health facility located in central Harlem of New York City, and formerly served as the associate pastor of congregational care and wellness at First Corinthian Baptist Church for 4 years. Known for her work in removing barriers to mental health access for communities of color. She was recently featured in the 2020 Root 100 list of most influential African Americans. She has also been featured in multiple print and digital publications, including Vice Magazine, New York Times, and Sojourners Magazine. She holds a Master of Divinity from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, a Master of Social Work from Columbia University, and a Bachelor of Science in Business Management from North Carolina A&T State University. I present to some and introduce to others my beloved friend and sister, the Reverend Kendra Frazier. She will lead us in a 20 to 25-minute presentation, then we'll have a moderated conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Quincy, for inviting me. I want to first start off by thanking Dean Carter and yourself, as well as those that will view, for inviting me and for allowing me to be the last person to present on this Thurman Thursday. I didn't realize that, so it is quite a joy. I'm humbled and honored. So I want to talk from the topic today, vocation, trusting your inner knowing and accepting closed doors. Trusting your inner knowing and accepting your closed doors. First, I entered North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University with certainty, like many of my peers. Certainty that my chosen business management major would garner the lifestyle I desired. And like my parents, I would spend the entirety of my career within the field I majored in. Despite being called into ministry at 14 and accepting my call at 18, I recognized that my sight was on having a career that could support me in securing a livable salary, a 401k, health insurance, and other necessary benefits, not on the journey of vocation. So, what is vocation? Reverend Reinhardt stated it earlier from Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, which is my go-to Bible for vocation. But Parker says this: vocation is a strong impulse or inclination to follow a particular activity or career, often associated but not limited to religious pursuits, connected to purpose. Vocation, it is not tied to how to make money, how to create safety, nor how to be comfortable. It is tied to the purpose that dwells in you. That purpose is you. You are your purpose. Purpose is not something that we have to find. It is something you come into the awareness of and discover. It is often what I like to call our pursuer selves, the selves that pursue things, places, and experiences based on family tradition, familial advice, and societal norms that we allow to be our guiding posts until we recognize the sound of the genuine within ourselves, which Howard Thurman says is in every one of us, waiting for us to listen. Last September, I had the opportunity to attend a 5-day ancestralization training with shaman Malidoma Somé from the Dagar tribe of Burkina Faso in West Africa. I was introduced to Malidoma's work my first year of seminary. He's written several books. My first book of his was The Healing Wisdom of Africa. In The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Malidoma offers that our Western world does not support us in attuning ourselves to our inner knowing. He outlines the naming ceremony of his culture. In this naming ceremony, the mother, the father, and the priest are present. The mother takes on the voice of the child yet born. The child yet born responds to the inquiry of the priest who asks, "What is your purpose?" In an effort for the village to effectively support them in being cultivated and anchored in their purpose, in essence, anchored in themselves. It is important to note that the child is offering their knowingness of why they are being placed on this planet, not asking for any input from those external to them. So, what is inner knowingness? Parker Palmer says that inner knowingness is that before you tell your life what truths and values you have decided to live up to, let your life tell you what truths you embody, what values you represent. This telling of life comes from one's ability to be attentive to the happenings of their life, balanced with an attuned ear to the wisdom that comes from oneself in the still moments of living. As Psalms 46:10 reminds us, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know the divinity that resides in you, that patiently is waiting for you to listen. My inner knowingness foundationally started in the Church of God church that I was raised in, that my great grandmothers helped charter over 115 years ago. What I like to name as my birthright gifts, which Parker Palmer talks about, are those gifts that come natural to us. I discovered in church the gift of listening, the gift of being a grounded presence and a calming energy to people around me. And then the gift of leadership. I was the child that grew up through Sunday school and matriculated in high school, being the youth president, serving as the piano player when our regular pianist wasn't available. I was the child that was considered the poster child, so to speak, within my local congregation, serving as junior usher and really getting into different auxiliaries of the church, even serving as youth choir director from time to time. And I recognized that those were my birthright gifts. And we all have birthright gifts if we're attentive to what we're drawn to and what comes natural to us. In our inner knowingness, particularly when we are younger and we are listening to so many voices outside of ourselves, from parents to mentors to teachers, sometimes fear can rise up. Fear disrupts our inner knowing and our birthright gifts. Howard Thurman says this in his book, Jesus and the Disinherited. Fear is one of the persistent hounds of hell that dog the footsteps of the poor, the dispossessed, the disinherited. There is nothing new or recent about fear. It is doubtless as old as the life of man on the planet. Fears are of many kinds: fear of objects, fear of people, fear of the future, fear of nature, fear of the unknown, fear of old age, fear of disease, and fear of life itself. Then there's fear, which has to do with aspects of experience and detailed states of mind. I wanted to highlight that word disinherited because when we are disinherited, we are disconnected from our own internal knowingness, our reservoir of divinity that is always available for us to tap into to get the knowingness that we need to move into our next step forward. But when we take the advice of our fears, we don't have access to that inner knowingness. And sometimes our birthright gifts are overshadowed. So when I think about the fears that arise, fears can sometimes comes from the closed doors of life. Remember, I entered undergrad with certainty. Some of you may have entered with certainty as well, not knowing along the way that I would meet up with some closed doors that were really divine opportunities. So I wanted to talk about my closed doors to support you all in knowing that there is always flexibility in your vocation because vocation is one of discovery. So my first closed door was getting out of undergraduate and moving to Atlanta to work for Pepsi Bottling Group. It was my first managerial job, my first sales job right out of college, making it a great salary with health benefits, a 401k, all the things that I believed that I needed. About a year in, my soul was weary, and I recognized that corporate America was not for me. I transitioned out of Pepsi Bottling Group, went to another organization for a couple of months, and recognized that that organization was not for me either. It was called SCORE. It was a tutorial program for K through 10th graders, and I was one of the associate directors. And I'm a Sagittarius, I'm a free spirit, and I like to be able to move around. And that job didn't give me the freedom to be able to do that. And I remember in my angst attempting to get back to Pepsi Bottling Group, and that door remained closed. They told me I could not come back. And so, with that closed door, I transitioned into Brinks Home Security, selling security systems, writing up security plans for different homes that I was in, from Roswell, Georgia to Marietta to Atlanta proper to Smyrna, you name the list. I went to a lot of homes around Georgia to give people security systems, and I did an amazing job. I'm a great salesperson. I have a natural knack for talking to people and making people feel comfortable, and I did amazingly well. And I did so well that I was extended an invitation to interview for a managerial position there, and ended up not getting that position. And so I took that as my opportunity to segue into seminary in 2007. In undergrad, I knew that I would be eventually going to seminary, but simply didn't know when. So I believe that this closed door was my opportunity to go to Emory University, Candler School of Theology, where I had the opportunity to meet my dear brother and friend, Quincy. In matriculating through Candler School of Theology, I had an amazing time. It was almost like being in undergrad the second time around. Had some beautiful experiences. And once I transitioned out of Emory, I moved on to become a chaplain at Grady Hospital in the clinical pastoral education program. And now, while I was there, I had some tremendous experiences and eventually moved on to become a paraprofessional at the Imara Center in 2010. So it was an entryway into becoming a therapist, but I didn't know at the time. But while I was at Grady, I decided to apply to a doctorate program at Emory, a doctorate of theology program, and I happened to get in. But at this time, the program did not have funding, and I couldn't imagine paying out of pocket to go to school at this point. And so I remember painstakingly writing out my application for the Forum for Theological Education. And I had great recommendations, a wonderful application that I submitted, and ended up finding out that I was not accepted for this large grant that I applied for, which was going to supplement my or pay for my education at Candler. And I didn't get the funding because nothing in my application really talked about church. It spoke about clinical practice. And so that was a closed door. That closed door led me to speaking to one of my dear friends, sisters, civil rights activist, Ruby Sells. And I remember sitting in Ruby's living room and her saying, Kendra, have you considered applying to social work schools outside of the country and outside of the state of Georgia? And at that point, I had not considered. So, in listening to her and then allowing it to settle in myself, I decided to apply to Columbia University School of Social Work and got in. So I moved into Columbia University School of Social Work with the closed door through the Form 4 theological education. Once I matriculated through Columbia University social work program, I moved back to Atlanta, and the same organization that I was a paraprofessional in, I became a lead therapist in. And so I was with this organization from 2014 to about 2016. Somewhere around 2016, possibly in the beginning of the year, I became very clear that being a lead therapist was not enough. It did not fit where I felt I was being called to in terms of pastoral leadership. And I remember having extensive conversations with an alum of Morehouse, Senior Pastor Michael Warren of First Corinthian Baptist Church, having served at First Corinthians as a minister while I was going to graduate school at Columbia. And I remember talking to him about this challenge I was having and simply crying and letting him know that I feel called to pastoral leadership and I don't want to be broke as a pastor was one of the first things that came out of my mouth. And we prayed. And then eventually, unbeknownst to me, that he was clear about my gifting and skill set as a therapist and as a person of service, that he invited me back to First Corinthian to serve as the associate pastor of congregational care and wellness, with no commitment from Pastor Mike yet, as he's affectionately known at First Corinthian Baptist Church. I decided to quit my job at the Morris Center around June of 2016 because I didn't see myself moving forward and being content being where I was. And eventually I was hired on to serve as the founding executive director of Hope Center Harlem, a free mental health facility in Central Harlem, as well as the associate pastor of congregational care and wellness. So I was at First Corinthian from about 2016 to 2020. And I thought that that was my dream job, being able to integrate clinical therapy as well as ministry. In 2020, that job came to an abrupt ending because we were simply no longer in alignment. And I ended up delving deeply and delving full time into my consulting company, Kind, knowing yourself in need of devotion. Kind first began in Atlanta as an LLC, and I did nothing with it in 2015. And so 2019, I decided to close it in Atlanta and incorporate in New York. And Kind was birthed officially then. In 2020, we had our first launch to introduce people to our services of individual couples and family counseling. And the services continue to grow into executive listening as well as executive coaching for people in various organizations. So I am excited to be able to pivot with power. So vocational discernment for me is all about developing the capacity to pivot with power. It is important along your vocational journey that you, one, develop multiple skill sets along the journey of vocation. It was an understanding that I needed to have something to fall back on, that I went into social work school. I had an opportunity to support a young man at the hospital that I was serving in, who unfortunately attempted to castrate himself because he had a difficult time integrating his spirituality and sexuality. And unbeknownst to me, I went to his room and had no idea that he came from a very fundamentalist religious background, and heard many things from his pulpit that led him to believe that he should be a eunuch because of his same gender attraction. And being someone who identifies as same gender loving and as lesbian and as queer, I sat with this young man and companioned with him for a couple of days. And in my companioning with him and serving and offering him pastoral care, I understood that my skill set as a minister was limited. So the only reason why I went to social work school was in order to be a more effective spiritual leader. And that gave me an additional skill set to be able to utilize along my journey of vocation. The second thing that I would love for you all to consider is to become bivocational. It has allowed me to pivot with power by garnering skill sets that are necessary to support people in living whole lives. And both of my vocation go right back to my birthright gifts of being able to listen, being able to offer a grounding space and grounding energy for people, are the things that I do now, serving as a spiritual director or a therapist or even a coach. And then lastly, be willing to discover. Be willing to not hold on to what you believe that you need to know, that is external to you, that you may have picked up from your family system or again from mentors or those that you value. Trust yourself in discovering those things that you are inclined to. Even trust yourself by discovering those things that you are not, but simply discover and don't allow yourself to try to control what the discovery is supposed to look like. Step into a life of discovery and curiosity so you can really live deeply into a life of vocation. Thank you all again for allowing me to share and be present with you all.
Wow. Thank you so much for a very thought provoking talk. You started out talking about your journey, your formation, your theological formation. I want you to kind of describe for us. Many of our students are young, some are very aware of the calling as you were in undergrad. And so, can you talk to us about or describe to us your call? What was that like? What was its formation?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. So I'll see if I can summarize my answer. I was I was 14 years old when an aunt and uncle of mine who were living in Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, came home visiting for the Christmas holiday. And they pulled me to the side and said, Kendra, this prophet has called you by name, said that you would touch the lives of many young people. And at the time, being 14, I was like, I don't want to be a minister, even though I was actively serving in the church. Like, that's not what I heard from God. That's not what I'm doing. At the time, I was really interested in being a mechanical engineer. And because I was like, I need something that's going to make money. Ministers don't make money. That's not what I'm doing. So finally, I accepted my call at 18. Usually the way that the divine works for me is if I'm not making myself still, it supports me in getting still. And so that stillness came and allowed me to really accept my call, even though I was still uncomfortable because I was still working on integrating my sexuality and spirituality, still going, accepting my call, but still carrying a lot of shame for being gay and being a Christian, and not knowing really how God was going to use me um, being all of me, because I was taught in church that homosexuality was a sin. And so I couldn't fathom at 14 and at 18, God using me being just who I was. And so it was around probably the age of 23 where I moved to Atlanta and met my first girlfriend there. And I remember having this very clear conversation with God and questioning God in a way that I was not given the license of freedom to question in my Church of God context. And so I remember asking God, like, God, I have tried to pray this thing away. I've tried to fast this thing away, and it is still here, this attraction to women. So what's up? What are you saying? There's a woman in my life that I want to be with, but I need to hear from you. And it was my first time really not relying on people external to me, but on my direct connection with the divine, with God. And just as clear as I'm speaking with you now, God was simply like, it's always been okay. You never asked me. And I
Mhm.
was like, blown away. You mean
Mm.
all this time I've been struggling and I could have asked you directly and found out then that you were okay. And so that really gave me the courage and the agency to really live my life with boldness and authenticity. And when you met me at Candler, I had already been out for 2 years. And so I was very clear in going to seminary that I was not going to be someone that was ashamed of my sexuality and trying to hide it while also pursuing ministry. So that is a bit about how my theological formation started. And since then, because of my interest in religious practices outside of Christianity, I am very expansive in my own theological understanding and practice. Ancestral veneration is something that's very important to me, honoring my ancestors. Hoodoo practitioners run in my family line. So that is also something that I practice. And my theological formation continues to evolve. For me, it is something that never ends, but is always ongoing.
And I think you said something very important, right? This idea of sexuality and spirituality, which many folks try to bifurcate, separate, compartmentalize, right? So I'm thinking about the ways in which the Black church or the church at large perpetuates, right, notions of hypermasculinity that in many ways brings about the dread of the homoerotic, right? So
Mhm.
as a licensed social worker, as one who is trained theologically, talk to us about the ways in which the church creates Black trauma that impacts Black community,
You froze up, Quincy. I didn't hear the last part. The ways that the church creates Black trauma that.
that impacts Black sexuality.
Mhm. I think one way that the church perpetuates Black trauma is by the poor theological positions that they use to ostracize LGBTQ folks. The Sodom and Gomorrah text that people misinterpret, and so many others. So that's one. I think the second one is inviting people into silence. Silence can be such a powerful prison of self abnegation. And it is often very difficult for people to break through their silence because they are concerned about who they are going to lose. I think that the whole notion of living into this perfected state, really this black and white thinking that uh, many fundamentalist theological frameworks present, is very difficult for people to live into. This idea that you can't really embrace your sexuality, because the only way that you should embrace it is by being is by reproducing, which is not so. I believe that the cause for many people in terms of leaning into those very staunch religious strictures really keeps people from the life of discovery that I was speaking of in the end. Really, for me, life is not about getting it right or getting it wrong. It's about discovering and finding out what works for you and what doesn't. We get an opportunity to live into our vocation when we give ourselves the freedom to be able to discover. And for me, growing up in the Church of God, which is a very fundamentalist context, I did not have that opportunity until I got out of the roof from my parents' home and began to discover new religions that were unbeknownst to me in undergrad, whether that was Islam or Baha'i or Judaism, as well as meeting other LGBTQ brothers and sisters and talking to them about their own struggles. I think that the church also perpetuates the trauma, particularly among LGBTQ folks, when we think about the ways that you can have an affirming church, but there's this level of hyper visibility and visibility where you let LGBTQ people serve in the church, but they're still not welcome to go to, say, a premarital counseling group, or you're still not willing to marry them. So those are some ways that I'm thinking of now.
So pivoting back a little bit on your presentation, or at least the opening, right, about Parker Palmer. And so you have informed us, right, that vocation is an art of discovery, right?
Mhm.
Parker Palmer is suggesting that vocation is an act of listening. I want you to kind of talk to us about vocation as an act of resistance.
Mm. I love that. Vocation as an act of resistance. I think
Mhm.
vocation is an act of resistance because it invites you to resist what is normative to you in terms of your upbringing, what's normative to you in terms of those that may be around you, giving you things that are reasonable and logical. For me, I know that I have often scared my parents or given them some challenge and moving and being guided by my own spirit. I came out of undergrad making good money. And to the people around me, it was not prudent for me to forego that managerial position in Pepsi Bottling Group in corporate America. It just did not make sense, particularly given the bills that I had, living on my own, not having family in Atlanta at the time. But I did it anyway because I needed to resist this notion that I needed to be in a place that was not serving me, that I didn't feel like I was making a difference in. And so that resistance took me to this path where I really was able to embrace my authentic self with courage. I remember being in seminary and being out and having the opportunity to go to this church in Brazil to intern for a Baptist church there. Had a wonderful time serving in their ministry and told the pastors that I was queer as soon as I met them because I didn't want any issues. Like, if this is a problem for you, let me know and I can go home now. I didn't have a problem with that, but they were liberation theologians and they were totally supportive. Eventually, along the way, my host family had to leave to be present with their daughter who was graduating. And so I ended up being with another family that I hit it off with, and they wanted to take me in. I was confronted by one of the family members who asked me, "Where is your namorado?" A namorado is a boyfriend. Do you have a namorado? I mean, she just kept asking me, and it got to the point where I simply was just like, I don't have a boyfriend. I have a girlfriend. And I didn't recognize that she had a problem with it until the next day. I heard the pastor knocking on the door saying, "Vamos, vamos, vamos, Kendra." And it was on a Wednesday night. And he quickly got me out of the house. And we went to a Confofu, which is like an apartment community where other seminarian students were Black women interns who were from Duke Divinity School. And I was with them until that Wednesday evening. And I remember him calling my name from the pulpit, telling me that he wanted me to meet him in his office. And so I get to his office and he's just like, Kendra, why did you tell them that you were gay? They weren't ready to hear that. And I simply said I wasn't ready for them to be prying into my personal life. But shortly after that experience, of course, that was devastating to be kicked out of a home because I was queer. And it was also an experience that I needed to be able to experience to move on to the next divine opportunity. The closed doors are always a divine opportunity behind them. And so we ended up going to a smaller village, maybe about 2 hours away from where I was serving. And it was a female pastor there who gave us this book that she had been teaching her congregants, and it was probably about 10 of them. And the book was, What Does the Bible Really Say About Homosexuality? And I was blown away that this female pastor in Brazil, which is fairly religious, was teaching her congregants from this book. And she had most of her congregants identified as LGBTQ. And so we had this beautiful conversation in my broken Portuguese, her broken English, around spirituality and sexuality. But had I not had that experience prior, I would not have had the deep gratitude that I have for being able to be queer and be in ministry and have these experiences, to have that conversation, to be able to come back here and do the work that I do here, working in religious trauma, in the area of religious trauma with LGBTQ folks and other folks who have been damaged by their church experiences. And so I'm just very grateful to be able to resist when it comes to my vocational pursuits in that way, because there was a time when many people said you can't be gay and be in ministry. And to resist that normative way of thinking has brought so many gifts into my life. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't resist. So thank you for that question.
So we looked at vocation as discovery, vocation as the art of listening, right? Vocation as the art of resistance. And part of that you talked about in your talk around trusting oneself, right? And so what can you talk to us about what that process entails? How does one trust their inner man, right? When they
Mhm.
still trying to discover, right? When listening
Mhm.
is very difficult, right? Because they're hearing all of the, as Howard Thurman would say, the echoes, the disturbance, the turbulence, right?
Mhm.
Out in the world that's telling them they can't be, or they can't do, or they can't succeed. So what are some steps, right? As a social worker, a licensed social worker, what are some steps that you uh, inform or give your clients that will help some young person, right,
Mhm.
discover their call?
It's a great question. For me, I would say it's really important to develop a meditative practice or mindfulness practice. I began developing a meditative practice probably in 2006, 2007, somewhere around that time, when I had ended the job that I was in for 2 months at SCORE and was transitioning into Brinks, not knowing what I wanted to do, having family members inviting me back to come to Charlotte to live. And I was like, I'm not coming back home. I want to be in Atlanta. I feel like there's something for me that's still here. And so I stayed. But during that time, I developed a meditation practice, and development to me is ongoing. But starting out little by little, I started out with 2 minutes of just silence, and allowing whatever came up to come up, practicing non-judgment, just to see it as that traffic that's going by. But developing a meditative practice now where I meditate 30 minutes to 45 minutes a day. And I stay consistent in it, because to me, that is where I meet God as myself. and get the inner knowing, get access to it in the ways that I need to. So developing a meditative practice, a meditation practice is really important, or some type of mindfulness practice, whether that looks like going outside for a mindfulness walk and being attentive to when your right foot places the ground and when your left foot places on the ground, or whether that is mindfulness eating, being attentive to how many chews it takes to eat whatever it is that you're eating, being attentive to the smell of it, engaging all of your senses to how it looks, to how it tastes, to what it sounds like, so on and so forth. But those moments of stillness allow us to get inklings that we otherwise may not get in our busyness. I think that another thing that I would invite people to do is to write it in your day the things that you want to acknowledge about yourself, the things that you have accomplished. So often we only want to acknowledge the grandiose things that happen in our lives, not being attentive to those small actions that it takes to get to the grandiose experience, to be able to give yourself a level of encouragement to move on to the next day. So acknowledgments are really important, as well as creating a gratitude list. I believe that cultivating gratitude gives way to the expansion of abundance. And so those things all add to being able to listen to what's happening and to be attentive to what's happening in your life in some really beautiful and powerful ways.
Yes, and I do agree. Matter of fact, the dean just warned me or suggested to me about a couple of weeks ago that I need to start journaling more, because the older you get, you start forgetting things. And so really keeping that journal that tracks your life, but also your progress, your talent.
Absolutely.
Um,
Hmm.
so something that your organization Kind, I want you to tell our viewing audience a little bit more about your organization, given one that the church really, I want to give the church some credit that they are having or starting to have the conversation around mental health and trauma.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not to the
Absolutely.
extent that we should. So I want you to kind of talk about this importance, and why is mental health and why
Hmm.
about trauma important to your formation, to your organization, right? You found
Hmm.
your organization on three principles: love,
Hmm.
life, and devotion.
Yeah.
Why those three principles?
Mm.
Us.
Perfect. So for me, love of self is the first key to loving others in really expansive ways. And life is sacred, and we excavate the sacredness from our living by really taking care of ourselves.
Mm,
And then devotion, staying devoted to ourselves and our healing. Because trauma is really about anything that is threatening to your life indirectly or directly, that impacts or disrupts your nervous system. We call them big T's and little T's. I mean, there are a myriad of things that can impact people's nervous systems that are relative to the individual. For some people, that could be a breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, could be a traumatic experience. The loss of a loved one can induce trauma. And then you have those big T traumas like natural disasters, car crashes, various abuses. And in working, being able to work in the Mechanicsville area, when I was a lead therapist at a Black home behavioral health agency, working at an elementary school, through that organization, I found that so many kids were traumatized but misdiagnosed with ADHD or ODD or any other behavioral condition, but it was really trauma that was impacting them. Waking up to gunshot wounds, seeing people be murdered right in front of them. And I believe that as brown and Black folks, we really can get accustomed to the trauma, but not have the language of how the symptoms show up in our bodies. And so we just press forward, not being attentive to ourselves. And so that is one reason why I thought it was important to create a curriculum while I was serving at First Corinthian called Becoming a Trauma Informed Church, because we found that through working at the Hope Center, the three main presentations were depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And I wanted to be able to create a curriculum to support our lay leaders to begin understanding how to realize the widespread nature of trauma, how to recognize the symptoms and the signs of trauma, how to respond to people when they are having a traumatic experience or when they are in a heightened emotional state, to support them in resisting re-traumatization. Oftentimes people get re-traumatized in search because people don't know how to respond to what's showing up. So how could I equip the lay leaders to respond effectively when people are coming in with a myriad of experiences from the community inside of the church doors? And so one of the things that I love to do is support other churches in being trauma informed, as well as other organizations. And so that is a big part of the work that Kind Consulting does. We also do the work, it's my own private practice as well. I see individuals, couples, and families. I also do executive listening sessions for organizations, which is a way to minimize the stigma of accessing therapeutic resources and offer a 30-minute listening session to staff members that may need it, which has transitioned in. Again, vocation is about discovery, me discovering my own gift for executive coaching and getting some learning from different executive coaching models and building that skill set to support organizations. So that is also a part of what I do, in addition to offering spiritual direction, which is really journeying and companioning with people to become even more acutely aware of how the divine is showing up in their lives and how that is informing the way that they want to navigate their living experience. So that is a work that Kind does, and I'm super excited to be able to lead our efforts and really supporting people in living whole lives.
So I'm thinking about some students who I
Mm-hmm.
had conversations with who come to college, and they are able to live their lives, and then they go back home and they have to live private lives. And so I'm wondering, what might a consulting company like yours look like as a curriculum in academic institutions?
Hmm. Hmm. That's a great question. We might have to talk about this offline, Quincy, to see what it can look like. I'm thinking about the student that is going home, though, and having to live a life that is not their own. Because my first question is always, are you safe? So if their silence is keeping them safe, I'm totally supportive of that. I always want to make sure that people are safe and well where they are. And also wanting to make sure that that student is reaching out to various communities where they can show up and be their full selves, whether that is through virtual community or possibly a local community where they might be going back home to. One of the things that I've been working on with my film partner, Katina Parker, is this documentary series called A Love Supreme, Black, Queer, and Christian in the South, which features about 6 families who have LGBTQ folks in their family systems who have either found ways to love beyond their limits or are either still wrestling to find those ways. And we have since been able to partner with students at Wake Forest University, 2 Master of Divinity students, as well as 2 undergraduate students, to begin creating a curriculum that can be transferable from the church to academic spaces, with garnering resources for LGBTQ folks specifically, through also creating workshop opportunities for parents who want to become more enlightened and culturally equipped to support their LGBTQ children. And so that comes to mind when I'm thinking of how kind can be made into a curriculum. But believe that the curriculum of becoming a trauma-informed church can be easily translated into academic curriculum, because we go through talking about the church as a hospital and talking about the ways that the church has been helpful, why the church is a go-to for so many people in our community to be cared for. And then we transition into talking about the ways that the institution has been harmful in a variety of religious settings, not just Christianity. Then we transition into talking about how to recognize the signs and symptoms of not only trauma, but of depression and anxiety, because we really want to invite the community into psychoeducation. And then after that, we go into talking about how to resist re-traumatization and how to respond to people by walking people through the steps on how to de-escalate crises in a healthy way. What communication skills do you need to be able to effectively do that? And then we end on talking about ways to practice holistic self-care. And then the second part of the model is introducing lay leaders and community leaders to what it means to be trauma informed through using the modality of motivational interviewing. I teach a class to first year social work students, a lab at Columbia University School of Social Work. And I've used that model to reframe how I teach others in the community, as well as people in the church, which is a wonderful person-centered modality to be able to have in your pocket, to learn how to ask people open-ended questions, to get them talking about themselves, how to use affirmations, how to use active and reflective listening, how to use summarization as a way to be able to effectively communicate with people. So, yeah.
That's good. So I have two questions, two more questions.
Mhm.
What would you say to your college self?
Ooh. Quincy, you are not going to make me cry today. Okay. What would I say to my college self? I would tell my college self that you are loved just as you are, that there is nothing that you need to do to change. As a matter of fact, who you are will set you up for the life that you want to live. So do it unafraid and unashamed. That's exactly what I would tell my college self.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, you have been amazing, and thank you so much. I hope that something was said that will spark some student, some person watching to be them better, to be their better selves. The last
Mhm.
question that we always ask all of our guests, and that is, what three books are you currently reading, and what what three books are you reading that you would suggest we read?
Mm. The three books that I read and reread are these three. Two of them have already been mentioned. One is definitely Let Your Life Speak, listening to the voice of vocation by Parker Palmer. The other one is The Healing Wisdom of Africa by Malidoma Somé. And then the last book would be The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score. It's a book that talks about how trauma, how we internalize trauma physiologically, and to inform people of the signs and symptoms to look out for. And so that is a thick book, but it's a great book filled with information, because I feel like it's important for us to be having that conversation about how trauma has impacted our family lines and what we need to do to heal.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And again, I love you. And this was an amazing conversation. Thank you
I
for
love you too, Quincy. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a joy to share and to be present with you today.
always. Well, on behalf of our founding dean and myself, thank you so very much for joining us for our last Thurman Thursday of the academic semester. But you may come back and join us on Sunday. This coming Sunday, our guest preacher is alumnus, the Reverend Wallace Clinton Baxter III, class of 2006. You do not, I promise you, you do not want to miss him. Until next time, be blessed. Peace.